On today's podcast, we have Dr. Duncan French. Duncan is the Vice President of Performance at the UFC. He's worked across over 40 different Olympic and professional sports, ranging from high diving to Premier League football. He's worked at Commonwealth Games, World Championships, and Olympic level. As an academic, Duncan has over 60 peer-reviewed publications and 9 book chapters. He's been at the UFC now for almost 7 years and has seen it grow to become one of the world's most popular sports and an incredibly profitable business. At the UFC, Duncan is responsible for 600 athletes from every continent on the planet. He set up the Elite Performance Center and program from scratch out in Las Vegas and more recently in Shanghai. In this episode, we're going to talk about all things UFC, what it's like working with Dana White and Larry Epstein, and how you can go about preparing athletes like Conor McGregor and Kamaru Usman. I hope you enjoy. Dr. Duncan French, welcome to the Accelerating Excellence podcast. Great to have you on.
Thank you, buddy. Good to reconnect. It's been a while, so I appreciate the invite.
Oh, mate, I'm delighted. I've been really looking forward to this one. And a lot of people I've been speaking to about the podcast have been too. I mean, I wanted to kick off with, you've excelled as this human performance expert. Like, what was the first moment that you sort of realized you could potentially pursue a career in this space?
Oh man, I mean, great question. You're digging it. I think sometimes we fall into these kind of positions, and I've got a lot of friends in the industry, and you speak to them, and we all kind of have the joke that we're all failed athletes, right? So there is a little bit of that. You take your own kind of personal ambitions and athletic career as far as you go, and we don't all get the pleasure of being an Olympian or a professional athlete. But the draw and the attraction and the excitement and what it means on a day-to-day basis to be around teammates or colleagues, and just what that emotional connection that a childhood of playing sports brings is it stays
sports,
with you, right?
What were the sports?
I mean, I was always a soccer player.
Okay.
I was a soccer player, and obviously then moved into I played a little bit of American football actually at a very high level in the UK and throughout Europe, and that was ironic being an English guy and playing American football. But I played, I was captain of the Great Britain junior, student, senior international team. Went to multiple European championships and things, and then dropped into rugby. Yeah, but I, like any kid, I've done everything. I've done martial arts and played around with different things. So. Yeah, it was when you get to the point where this is not going to happen for me, but how can I keep connected and chase medals, chase championships, chase trophies, and then you start to look at your career, and when you go into university or making those decisions about how can I kind of continue to make my hobby, the things that excite me, my day-to-day life, and I guess that's where it's pollinated from.
Brilliant. And can you give us a brief, because you've worked with so many sports. Could you give us a brief overview of the different areas you've worked in?
Yeah, again, I've been blessed. I think I've worked with over 40 different Olympic or professional sports in my career to date. And some of those, again, luck plays a great role in it. I ended up at the English Institute of Sport, which is an institute, right? So it supports many different athletes from different sporting styles and systems. So across my career through the institute system, I've been exposed to everything from women's rugby to rowing to highboard diving to weightlifting to sprinting and jumping, horizontal and vertical jumps, soccer, different things like that. I was in the English Premier League for a little bit of time, then moved into more management in the northwest of England in Manchester. So then you're into track cycling and you're around netball and squash, Paralympic swimming, all these different domains that you're kind of exposed to as you kind of develop your core skill set as a strength and conditioning coach, and you try to apply them to different end users. And then obviously I then came back I did my PhD in the States back in the day, but I wanted to come back to America, and now I then dropped into, the University of Notre Dame was my first kind of return back to the US. So then we had 28 different sports, many of which are American sports. So, you're into baseball and softball and, fencing and lacrosse and, all these other American football, obviously, all these other sports, and now I've landed at the UFC, which is combat athletes and mixed martial artists. So yeah, it's been a trip, it's been a ride.
And what do you think of the strengths that have enabled you to capitalize on that opportunity? You very humbly sort of use that word luck, but it's some of the roles you've had are incredibly competitive to get. I mean, the one, I think there's a lot of young guys out there that would, and women, of course, that would probably chop their right arm off to get the job you're in right now.
Mm. Yeah, I think you know what. Well, number one, I always I credit my coaching skills to being a child actor, which is interesting, right? But when I was a kid, I was a bit of a show off. I was like high energy, and my parents wanted to kind of channel my intensity, right? So they sent me to a Saturday morning drama group, and just tried to do some acting. And I became a really good character actor. I was on TV, I did radio, commercials, and things like this, and I
I
won
wish I knew that. I'll have
competitions.
to get some of those up.
Right. Yeah, you'll go into the archives to try and find some of those. But the reason why I say that is because, like I say, I got good at playing characters, at playing roles. And what that did, I think, is give me the capability to adapt and flex and create different interactions with people, and move my style, move my approach rather than having a rigid approach that is like one size fits all. My skill has always been to be able to talk up into the boardroom, to talk horizontally to my peers, to talk to athletes, and give them messaging in a way that they can comprehend and understand, and take complex principles of strength and conditioning and physical performance and dilute it down and make it transferable to someone that's not an expert. So I think that's been a skill which I've just brought from where I've grown up from. And I think, I always say we're not in a sports industry, we're in a people industry. And I like to think I can connect with people. I like to think that it's that kind of Dale Carnegie, how to win friends and influence people mentality. It's the 50-50 relationships. I've got to take something from this interface, and, the person or organization that I'm interacting with needs to feel that as well. So, at the start of it is making sure that people see value and trust in what you're bringing to the table. And then you've got to shuttle at home with technical expertise and a knowledge set that they say, all right, well, this person's highly competent and is bringing new innovative ideas and ways of thinking and working around our particular domain or our sport, which is interesting and intriguing to them. So they want to learn more. So it's a combination of things for me. And when I kind of interrogate the way I've tried to do it, it's always been about, diversity of communication, I think is a critical piece. And then diversity of skill set. I've never considered myself a one-trick pony. I'm not the weightlifting guy, or I'm not the bioenergetics guy. I think I can do quite a lot of different things. I think I have many strings to my bow at different levels through, PhD and research and academia, but also applied experience. And, that's what I believe kept me where I'm going, is because I can always pivot my skills and my expertise to be interesting and attractive to a different body or a different organization.
Absolutely. And in terms of that development phase, as you're mastering the art of performance, was there anyone that was particularly influential, or anyone that you sort of looked up to as you sort of went through that journey from aspirational young man to, right, now I'm leading programs at top sports teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can, if we're honest with ourselves, I think we can all look back through our lives and our careers and say, that's been a mentor or a pseudo mentor, or someone that I've respected, and that's everything from my dad being, he was very athletic as a kid, and he kind of always supported me, pushed me, but supported. It was more of a supportive environment. Like, okay, we're going to go to practice. You want to try this sport? Yeah, we'll try a different sport. Like, let's figure things out. So, my dad and my parents have always been very supportive. But then you think back to, your under 15 soccer coach, and, how he, influenced the team and brought energy and excitement to what we were doing on a Tuesday night when it's raining and pissing it down, and how can you make it fun, like all of those types of things. But certainly in terms of mentors, my PhD advisor, Dr. William Kramer, is someone who I would absolutely define as a mentor to me. He was someone that, instilled, work ethic, productivity, inquisition and understanding challenging problems and trying to figure them out. He was seminal in kind of my building my work ethic. And then, you're around, other coaches, people that I would say are my peers, to some extent. So whether that's, Paul Winspur or Jeremy Moody or, Nick Grantham, these people that are friends, they're my buddies, but they're also like mentoring me in a pseudo way that, I look to what they're doing and I try and compare and contrast and say, how can I be better? So, yeah, I think mentorship and who points in the right direction is an interesting concept.
And then pivoting slightly, like the UFC. I mean, what a fascinating organization, full stop. I mean, I remember as a kid watching Royce Gracie with my dad on, videotapes. And then you look at where it's come now. I mean, it's one of the most fashionable companies out there, innovative, it's rapid growth. I mean, can you just describe what it's like working for an organization like that, full stop?
Yeah, it's fantastic. And again, you talk about mentors. I mean, you look at Dana White, like, and my immediate boss, who's the CEO of the company, Lawrence Epstein, that they're people that are aspirational to me. Like I look at what they've done, how they are creative thinkers, how they've built the UFC and, navigated the hurdles of what the public perception of cage fighting and mixed martial arts is and made it mainstream and built it across the years. That's really aspirational. But yeah, it's a very dynamic company, and at its heart, it's a sports entertainment company. Now, the reason why I say that is because traditionally I've always worked in the Olympic system, which is also entertainment for fans, but it's just a different culture. It's a different set of values, maybe. We're obviously pursuing high performance, and we want to have the world's best product in respect to combat athletes. But also the entertainment piece, the promotional piece that comes with it. It's very different, in terms of working with Great Britain Taekwondo on an Olympic setting, which is a combat sport, and then mixed martial artists in the UFC setting, which is also a combat sport, but it's about a promotion and an entertainment and a revenue piece that comes with it. That's a really interesting dynamic that's taught me a lot in these 6.5 years that I've been here. So, on a day-to-day basis, the UFC is complex because we've got 670 odd fighters around the world. You get exposed to so many different cultures and people and language and, processes and behaviors. And that's fascinating. And it's really, I really use that to shape our operational system. It's something which I've learned a lot in the last 6 years, which is about how do we make things valuable to the customer, to the client, to the end user who is the athlete. It's very different how you do that to a Russian from Dagestani with a wrestling background to someone from China with a Sanda or a Wushu background to someone from Poland with a kickboxing background. Like you just got to think about all the time how you're making things relevant to the way that they see the world and the optic that they use. So again, coming back to systems that pivot and flex and target and use strategies to target very productive outcomes. The UFC has been like brilliant for that for me in my career and expanding my skill set and thinking about how are our performance systems truly impactful, because I think sometimes as performance professionals we look at the data, we see a problem, we think we're writing the world's best training plan, and we deliver the training plan and think it's going to be engaged and every athlete's going to think that's the best thing going. That's not the case at all, and we're naive if we're thinking that. We every level of that, how we collect data, how we interpret and manage data, how we share information, the type of techniques and tools that we use to give information to person A versus person B, what their desire to accept it and believe it. We can give them all the objective data and insights they're going, but people will always revert back to emotions and heuristic decision making in many cases. So like, how do we connect with the emotional side of delivering information too? So That's something which, outside of just working with what I believe is the most demanding sporting arena in all of sports, and again, I've worked with 40 different pro sports. These guys and girls are amazing at what they put their bodies through. And it's also taught me a lot about resilience and like overreaching and overtraining paradigms. But just the diversity and how your performance philosophies and paradigms need to be able to adapt and flex and change, I think is what the UFC has really brought to my career.
I mean, yeah, what a constraint to have to force that out of you as a practitioner. I mean, in terms of the problem set that you and your team are there to solve from a performance perspective to those 600 odd athletes, plus that I guess they've all got coaching teams as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what would you say are the sort of the big 2 or 3 problem sets that they maybe expect from you, or you and Dana perceive are most important to solve for them?
Well, I mean, I go back to the pollination of the Performance Institute as an entity. So before 2017, the UFC didn't have a high performance infrastructure. It's a promotions company. It would sell tickets and it would put events on around the world and sell those tickets and then move on to the next city. And in 2017, they created what I manage, which is now the 3rd biggest business unit in the whole of the UFC, is the Performance Institute. That the way I define it is it's just a high performance service arm of the greater UFC. So sports medicine, strength and conditioning, science, etc., etc. The reason why the Performance Institute was pollinated was because they were, in some scenarios, losing money. If an athlete, a big pay-per-view event, if an athlete dropped off a main card due to a weight miss or a last-minute preventable injury or something that could have been mitigated, then that's a financial hit to the company. So the way that I was essentially sold my role and sold my job is around asset management. We're in the business of protecting and promoting and developing and growing the asset. And, that's a human asset, a human resource, which is our athletes and our fighters. So what we do on a day-to-day basis is all about providing the complex and chaotic needs of a very disparate and diverse athlete clientele mechanisms to help them. Now, the big rocks in that space are what I've already mentioned. We're a weight classification sport. That's different to the English Premier League or the NRL or the NFL or the NBA. Like our athletes have to compete at certain weight classifications, and if they don't, they'll lose a lot of money, and we'll lose a lot of money. So that's something which, if we implement better systems and education and methodology, you can potentially eradicate it. Like as a idea, you could remove missed weights, but it happens, right? Because there's people using different tactics or kind of some archaic methodology or not really aware of the science and how your body works, and they'll miss weight. So that's a big one. And then obviously we're in a combative sport where collision and combat and injury is part and parcel of it. So how are you trying to, we're not removing injury, but how do we mitigate or lower injury rates? How do we expedite return to play with, the latest science and methodologies and approaches? They're the 2 big rocks. And the 3rd big rock is obviously we want to create a great product. Again, to fall back on how I've been shaped in my mentality now, it's a promotion. The UFC wants to be the leader in the field in combat sport. So we need a great product. We need our athletes performing at the top elite level in the Octagon for fan engagement. And how do we do that? And how we can advance the sport and as a philosophy, take the sport and continue to evolve it and grow it and accelerate it. That's kind of the big mandate. Those kind of 3 or 4 things are the mandate that we have on a day-to-day basis.
Fascinating. And in terms of the 600 odd athletes that you've sort of got under your wing, what's the process for selecting them into the organization?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure I fully understand that, right? And I don't say that flippantly, because in my space of long-term athlete development, you probably should say this guy knows exactly how people are recruited into the UFC. The reality of it is that unlike the US kind of a university system, where you have a draft at a university and it pushes you into the NFL or the NBA, or British soccer teams that have academy systems. People athletes are coming into the UFC through many, many different mechanisms and different ways. Some of them might be former Olympians. Ronda Rousey was a judo player. She had multiple, Olympic medals, and she got recruited to come into the UFC. Other athletes might be, freestyle wrestlers in collegiate NC2A sport, and they might win multiple national titles, like Bo Nickel. Is one of our up-and-coming athletes, was a multiple national champion at Penn State freestyle wrestling, and now has come into the UFC. Other athletes are fighting on lower level promotions, professional promotions, Cage Warriors in the UK, UAE Warriors, different promotions around the world. And when they start tearing up their opponents and going on a run of wins, then our scouts and particular kind of managers and people out in the community start to send those videos to our matchmakers and say, have a look at this person in Thai boxing or kickboxing or sambo wrestling in Russia or whatever it may be. So it's a really complex way that they end up in the UFC. Certainly what we've developed in our facility in Shanghai, China, is an academy system. And we're going to do that again in October in Mexico City. So we're formalizing talent development pathways under the umbrella of the UFC Performance Institute in certain territories to try and elevate the standards of athletes in those countries. So yeah, it's a really complex way of how they end up here, which again, coming back to my role and our team and how we try to look at, all right, development across time in an athletic, taking your athletic potential and optimizing that. It means that people come into the UFC at many different levels on that kind of bell curve of like development, optimization at the top, and then falling off and past your best. We get people that come into the UFC that are already way past their best, but the UFC wants to, get a new opponent or find a new fighter. And at the same time, we get, 18-year-olds, less than developed, athletes coming in, and now we're looking at, right, well, what's the next 7-8 years of your career look like?
And in terms of the standards that the UFC expects from the people within its, I guess, on the program, is it purely based on their performance in the ring, or are there set standards and benchmarks to meet outside of the ring? For instance, if they are going to be put through a movement screen or a weight loss, and is there any discipline around that?
So again, just the dynamics of our company and the way the business model works, which again is very different to Manchester United or the New York Yankees or whatever it may be. Manchester United own the rights to the players, so they can mandate, and essentially they can tell their athletes what to do and when to do and how to do it. Every single athlete on the UFC roster is an independent contractor. They sign bout agreements that say, all right, James, we're going to assign you to a 4-fight agreement. So we'll guarantee you 4 fights over the next 2-3 years, and we're going to give you X amount of money for each one of those fights. The rest of the time, you're on your own. You can do what you want. Like, so in your gym back in the UK, all right, then we're not, Dana White and the UFC is not influencing that. Now, what we as a Performance Institute try and put ourselves right in the middle. We try and provide a resource that you can tap into it as and when you so desire.
So you're an asset that they can leverage to optimize performance.
Yeah. So we don't pay them a salary apart from the money for the fight, but they can tap into this infrastructure free of charge at no cost and get resources and services that they might not otherwise be able to afford. So that's kind of a big part of the puzzle.
And from an athlete's perspective, then, what would be the typical way that they would look to leverage the Institute? I mean, I've heard incredible things about the actual site itself and the setup. But what would a typical UFC athlete look to leverage, and how might that look over a period, in a camp, say, going into a fight?
Yeah, we have 3 domains that we kind of operate in. Number 1, in person. We're in Las Vegas, okay? We're also in Shanghai, China, so you can go there if you want to, if you're on that side of the world. but you can come and visit our operation and get services. Number two, remotely. So we'll do interactions and remote coaching. We have meal delivery systems that we can send out, calorically managed meals. We look at wearable technology that we deploy and do different things to try and keep that connectivity going when you're not essentially with us day to day in person. And then the third layer is event support. So I send 5 of my staff to every single fight week. So if you're on the UFC roster, you will interact with our staff at fight week. That's everything from we can cook every single meal for you. I have 2 chefs that I send to every single event, and we'll prepare every single meal. We'll take that worry or that challenge off your mind. So if you're from Poland and you get booked on a fight in Brazil, and you're like, well, what the hell am I going to eat? What restaurants do I go to? And I'm also trying to make weight, so I need to manage my calories and all those different types of things. And I don't know if this food is good for me or if it's going to challenge my weight descent. We'll take all that off your thought process. And we also have dietitians that will manage that and medical providers at the event. So in person, remotely, and at event support is kind of where we do our work. But the interface interaction is very diverse. It's everything from people coming in person for 2 days, just doing some testing, some diagnostics, some assessments, and then taking that information back to their gym and using it independently, through to kind of the normal visitation is like a mini camp strategy. Anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. They'll come and kind of base themselves at the PI and really embed themselves in our systems and our services. Some people do kind of 8-week fight camps in our facility and tap into everything as they prepare for a fight. And then other people, might blow out their ACL, their PCL, or MCL, and they'll up sticks from home, and they'll come and live in Las Vegas for 9 months and get free medical services with all the supporting infrastructure around it, free of charge. That's a big deal when you come to medical insurance and things like that in the US. Yeah. So it's a very diverse kind of system we operate, and again comes back to the system has to pivot and flex to meet all these specific requirements of every single athlete. We don't have cookie cutter programming. Everything we do is custom and bespoke, and it is done on an individual basis.
In terms of some of there's obviously just global icons that the sport's produced. This one that jumps to mind for me is, of course, like the Conor McGregor. I mean, when you're looking at an athlete like Conor and his preparation, if you had the magic wand in terms of complete access to him and complete responsibility and ownership of his preparation into physical preparation or psychological preparation into, say, a camp, what are the sort of things you're looking at?
Well, first and foremost, for any athlete, it's like, what resources do they already have available to them? Conor's blessed because he's had a great career and he's got money that he can wrap himself with his own strength coach, his own therapist, his own dietitians and things like that. And then what we'll do is we'll obviously interact, and support the stakeholders. So, the ring of stakeholders around Conor McGregor in the middle of that kind of system that he's created as the CEO of his own company, we'll have a seat at the table, hopefully. But we understand that, all right, his strength coach is going to be directing his program. So let's connect our strength coach with his strength coach and see if we're aligned, see if we've got any cool ideas and things that we've learned, any data or information that we can kind of present to them, that where the sport is developing and growing. Same thing, with the therapist. Do they need specialist medical skills that we can offer and they might not have? And therefore, you can come and engage with our services, or are you doing well wherever it may be? Conor McGregor is kind of at the pinnacle of that because he's got everybody, but there's hundreds of athletes that don't have anybody, right? And we'll try and wrap ourselves in entirety around this athlete and give them all the services that they need. It's kind of like the law of thirds, right? If you take the whole roster of 600 and whatever, 1/3 ask for everything, because they might not necessarily have good infrastructure and services. So they'll really try and lean on the Performance Institute to help them gain competitive advantage, to help them with medical requirements, dietary requirements, feeding, whatever it may be, training, psychology. 1/3 kind of dip the toe in certain areas of our operation. So they might say, I'm good over here. I've got my own dietitian and I've got my own strength coach, but man, this left shoulder is really killing me. Can I come and see your medical providers? And then they'll just tap into one part of our operation. And then the other third, we might rarely engage with because they're either well-resourced, or we'll just do the competition support for them when they come and fight at events. So again, there's a lot of variety. It's not one size fits all. And our system, I think, does a good job of saying, hey, listen, you can have everything. You can take everything we offer and we'll deliver it to the best of our abilities. Or if you don't choose to engage with us, don't worry, we're busy with enough people over here. But when you are ready to engage, we'll be ready as well. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And in terms of that third that almost do want it all, what's on the menu? What sort of things are you looking at? I guess there's the obvious things like strength and conditioning, the sort of therapy, nutrition we've talked about. What might be the steps you'd take them through?
I mean, well, first of all, people love free food. I'll tell you that much.
They do indeed.
So we brought culinary services as kind of a vertical pillar on. We already had dietitians,
just a sales technique.
But yeah, like you use the food to open the door, and then you get into the bigger thing. But I mean, yeah, often it's like strategy, and I say that strategy is kind of a bigger paradigm because number one, it's an individual sport, right? And everyone is looking for competitive advantage. And if you close the Octagon door and you haven't done the work, that's on you. If I go on a soccer field, there's 10 other guys that if I'm having a 60% day, that they'll pull up the other 40%, right? But it's a sport of consequences in MMA, right? So if you haven't done the body of work and you haven't prepared optimally, you'll get found out pretty quickly. What that means is that they usually explore and are keen to explore ways of understanding how they can advance, how they can get ahead. And, like, let's be honest, combat is pretty spit and sawdust, right? It's the most granular level competition there is. Fight somebody. But in this day and age, and as the modern era is kind of coming through, they're starting to understand what can science and what's training science, what's the latest methods? Can you tell me what the latest methods is? Can you tell me where I'm at? So, all right, let's do some testing. Let's give you some information that'll make you and your coach be able to get to decisions quicker. We can really break down your fight and show you where you've lost or won your last fights. If you've got a new opponent, we're not sharing their information, but we can share, weight class tendencies, and you can then start strategizing after that. So again, the things that they come and seek from us are, a lot of information around making weight because it's integral to the sport. And how do they do that? Because again, if you listen to the media, it's the fight before the fight. Like if you have a bad weight cut, that's tough. It's physically and psychologically challenging. So how do they lower that challenge? How do they also lower the risk? So there's a big piece there, and that taps into the food. A lot of them want to, evaluate and assess themselves. So our strength and conditioning, diagnostics, our sports science diagnostics is a big piece of what we do. And then medical, right? Because again, we have world-class practitioners that work with combat athletes every single day of the week, understanding the mechanisms of injury, the best ways to promote recovery from those injuries. If you're just kind of going down the road to your local physiotherapist that doesn't have that expertise and that body of work behind them, the fact of it is you're not getting best in class, and you're in the UFC. You should be getting world-class standard of care. So medical services are also a huge part that athletes really seek out and pursue. Our biggest in-service utilization, so in person, our biggest utilization is in the medical space. Our biggest remote utilization by far is in the nutrition space because we're doing remote coaching up to 8 weeks out in advance of someone making weight on the scales the day before a fight. So we have to get ahead of the 8 ball. We have to start doing this proactive conversation and coaching, way before, the competition itself.
Sorry to interrupt the podcast, but before we dive deeper into the conversation, I want to express how grateful I am that you're voluntarily choosing to spend your time here with us. I also want to take a moment to ask for your support. I want to bring you the best podcast I can in terms of guests, engaging discussions, and thought-provoking conversations every week. And that's where you come in. By hitting that like button and subscribing to the podcast, you play a vital role. Simply put, when you hit that like button or subscribe, you enable the podcast to reach a much wider audience. And the wider the audience, the easier it is for guests within my network to convince their agents, management teams to free up their diary and come on the show. Thank you in advance for your likes and subscriptions. Now, let's get back to business. What's your thoughts in general on this potentially controversial one on the weight cut itself and the damage it can do? And I've heard a lot of people talk about the idea that you should just weigh in before the fight.
Yeah.
And then scrap. Do you think that would, what do you think the pros and cons to that are?
Yeah, it's a very topic. It's a topic of great discussion, and so it should be, right? Because it can really compromise the physiology of an athlete. All right, and touch wood, but sadly, in some lower level promotions, weight cutting has become sadly, people have lost their lives weight cutting. Now that should never be the case.
Can you give those listening just some context in terms of how much weight some of these performers lose?
Yeah, I mean, so we as a recommendation, so at the UFC Performance Institute, we recommend athletes lose. So let me back up a little bit, right? There's the weight descent, which is the removal of inefficient, body tissue, so body fat, all right? So that takes place over weeks and weeks and weeks, okay? That takes place over 12 to 8 weeks prior to even going in the octagon. Athletes have to start to look at their body composition and lower their fat content. The weight cut is an acute process of losing weight by the removal of fiber from your gut and fluid from your body. So that can be done through sweating, urination, etc., etc. And you essentially do a short-term reduction in weight, step on the scales, and then it allows you to kind of restabilize again. So when we're talking about weight cutting, we're often talking about dehydration tactics or the removal of fluid from your body. And that's where in other promotions, sadly, athletes have done it very incorrectly. And sadly, some have lost their lives. Some have been transported to hospital, but it can be a very challenging situation. Now, if done scientifically, that can be a very straightforward process. Okay, it can be a very straightforward process because what we do is we calculate the different areas of your body that we can remove that from. Fiber in your gut, the removal of sodium from your muscles, and also glycogen carries water in your muscles, and then obviously whatever you kind of urinate out. So mathematically comparing all those 3-4 compartments within your body where we can remove fluid from, we know we can make this drop over 2 or 3 days, right? So there's a long way of saying on a Tuesday prior to a Saturday night fight, we want our athletes to report in about 8% above their weight that they will actually step on the scales at. Now, 8% is a very doable number. If you come in at 6%, even better. 5%, great. All right. The lower and closer to your weigh-in, the less demanding on your body the whole process is going to be. But there are athletes that go way above that 8%, 15% of someone's body weight, 12% on 3 or 4 days. 3 or 4 days trying to make weight is a risky tactic. It's very challenging to do that. And you're certainly putting yourself in a compromised position. So, there are those types of scenarios. But again, it's an educational piece that we're trying to coach up the roster of methods, how you should do this, how you should manage the longitudinal weight cut and the longitudinal weight descent, and then the short-term weight cut. It's all part of the movement of education and methodology in the sport.
Really interesting. In terms of the competition itself, I guess it's the Saturday night, the big event. What are the sort of factors that you're trying to really get hold of to optimize and enable that individual to peak?
So most of our work on a Saturday night is done, right? You got to bank it, and it's got to be in the bank, and you can draw on that credit, right? It then just becomes very much, a psychological management piece, right? It becomes about your ability. And we have a saying, MMA is 90% psychology, apart from the 70% that's physical, right? So ultimately, there's a lot of mental game, there's a lot of physical game. We have psychologists on our staff that are working on things like competition anxiety, walking out in front of thousands of people in the arena. How can I make sure that this is normal to me? This is a routine. I'm also going into a fist fight. I've done this before. I'm comfortable. I've done the body of work. So it's all of systems and processes of rehearsal. Which largely is managed by their own coach. Okay, let's not, that's done by their corners and their coaches. But yeah, things like psychology services and working on competitive anxiety and being present and in the moment. We do a lot of that type of work. Our psychologists do that. The bioenergetics piece is the other thing, right? I've never heard anyone come out the octagon and say I wasn't strong enough. But I've heard lots of people come out and say my conditioning wasn't where it needed to be, or I had an adrenaline dump and I just felt fatigued. I couldn't get going. So you've got to make sure that your warm-ups and your rehearsal and your sequences are on point. You've got to make sure that you've tried to remove that anxiety and that adrenal elevation of the hormone dump. You've got to make sure that they are in a position of conditioning that will see them through 3 or 5 round fights. So Saturday night, I mean, there's nothing like being around a fighter on a Saturday evening going into a fight, right? That's I haven't had, I won't say the pleasure, but I've never stepped in the octagon in that type of scenario myself, but I've been around the fighters preparing, and it's a unique kind of feel.
Is there one particular moment that you could maybe talk us through in that respect that's perhaps a highlight in terms of representing what you're saying is unique about that?
For me or for the fighters, you mean?
For you, like experiencing that, is there one moment that stands out, a particular fighter perhaps, in terms of that, how it should be done?
Not necessarily, because again, they all have their own, they all have their own ways of doing it. Some guys are jumping around and high energy, and other people are headbutting lockers. You know what I mean? So it's like everything in between.
Yeah.
But what you definitely see is triggers. All right, you see people are triggered, and the switch goes right. So whether that is pulling, like for a lot of them, it's starting to wrap their hands. So when when you start to put the hand wraps on and they're getting wrapped up, you can see it's all right, it's go time. The other one is, pulling the gloves on, because usually they'll put the hand wraps on and then they'll do some loosening, flexibility work, they'll get warm, skip, whatever it may be. Then they'll pull the MMA gloves on and then, okay, there's a kind of another trigger. And then the third one is kind of like when they say they get the call, all right, you're going in 5 minutes, you're going in 2 minutes, right? TV commercial, 1 minute, all right, let's go. And then they're walking out the hallway, and then they're into, the dark hallways in the back of these arenas, out into the bright lights of the noise. I mean, if that's not a trigger, I don't know what is. So it's just, you start to understand psychology, and then it's fascinating, right? Because from a high performance perspective, how can we take those composite parts of success or high performance and put them into what we do long before that moment of performance, and actually get people accustomed to that? Can we use similar triggers? Can we kind of hack the system and get athletes kind of thinking it through, so that when they come into this scenario, it's not as big and grand and as large. It's like, it's just another day at the office. You know what I mean? So that's a fascinating kind of thing that I try and think about all the time.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, it fascinates me too. I mean, in terms of your time at the UFC so far, is there an athlete that stands out in terms of, I guess, across sport, the term professional, the ultimate professional? That is there someone that stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, there are this is a martial art, right? Mixed martial arts, and martial artists tend to they've come up through routine and structure, and respect. You go to the dojo and sensei and your jiu-jitsu class is telling you about respect, and you bow and you nod and you shake hands so a lot of them kind of, it's not all street fighting, right? It's not like, Saturday night at the bar and we'll bring that to the octagon. A lot of them are built up on structure and systems. But I mean, Kamaru Usman is a consummate professional. He's also got a wrestling background. freestyle wrestling and collegiate sports. So again, he's been through that collegiate program and practice times and structure and drills. There's so many athletes, but Kamaru springs to mind. He's always very professional in his regeneration, his rehabilitation, looking after his body. Brandon Moreno, who's Mexican, he's a current flyweight world champion. Again, completely different outlook on life. This guy's like a Lego fiend and loves kind of kids' toys and things, but it's like he's a cage fighter, he's a world champion. He goes through very different methods, but his preparation and his rehearsal is always on point and fantastic. Valentina Shevchenko trains like no other athlete I've ever seen train before. And that's of any sport. Like in terms of the repetition of skill over and over and over again. And every time she steps on the mats, it's this dedication to like fine tuning and perfecting all these various techniques. Like I could watch her for hours on end because it's just fascinating the resilience and the fortitude that she has to actually go through that type of training methodology. But the outcomes are really impressive as well. There's just two or three that I named, but there's a lot of guys that are dedicated to their craft.
Yeah, and in terms of the individuals that come through, and obviously, ultimately, it's perhaps the most meritocratic place you could find an octagon. But in terms of those that do make it to the absolute pinnacle, that world champion spot, yep. And those who do incredibly well, it's incredible to just get to the UFC, but who perhaps get there but sort of fizzle out. Anecdotally, is there anything you've observed that's unique about those that make it to the top versus the ones that don't quite get it?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking the 1% of the 1% if you're in the UFC, right?
Exactly.
It's not like we're all trying to jump in the octagon and fight. So that takes a certain type of individual, and I would say you've kind of made it. If you make the UFC, you're at the highest level. I mean, I do think it's the resilience piece, and I could use a ton of different adjectives, and but what resilience and mental and physical fortitude, I think are integral to being successful in this sport. You've got to embrace the suck. Every day you're going onto the mats and it's fight or flight scenario, right? Which is tapping into your neural system of parasympathetic, sympathetic management, right? So fight or flight by nature, these guys are just go. It's go time, right? I've got to go and fight in practice, let alone in competition. So the mental demand that places on this sympathetic arousal every single day, even drilling, let alone sparring, that takes a lot out of you emotionally, psychologically, and physically, obviously. And I think the best guys, the top guys and girls, are the ones that find a way to retain that resilience so that every single day they go on the mats, they can apply skill acquisition. All right. They can apply skill acquisition because their mental and physical fortitude hasn't regressed, meaning they're fatigued or they're tired or their cognition is a little bit off, and therefore they don't absorb skill acquisition as quickly. The best guys and girls, I believe, can go back on the mats every single day, retain a resilience and a fortitude that gives them this ability to just have better opportunity to absorb skill acquisition. There's a lot there. It's a long-winded way of saying it, but the skill acquisition then advances them to having better skill sets, better awareness in different scenarios and situations. And MMA is a sport of situations, right? It changes at any moment in time. Like someone's on my neck, now someone's on my shoulder, now I'm up against the fence, now I'm on the floor, now I'm stand-up striking. Like, are you comfortable in all these scenarios? Have you drilled them? Have you rehearsed them? Have you perfected them? Have you overloaded them? The best athletes in the world continue to do that at a high level every single day. So the skill acquisition just continues to grow. Whereas I think other people's skill acquisition gets blunted for 2 or 3 days because they either fatigue or they're worn out or they're just burnt out and they need kind of a rest and recovery piece, and therefore their skill acquisition gets kind of reduced a little bit. that's kind of my own take on it. But I think that's a big piece of success in this sport. It's a tough sport.
Fascinating. And in terms of your career so far, is there a peak experience you've had?
Um, yeah, I mean, there's lots. There's those athletes that you rehabilitate from an ACL injury in a super quick time, and they go back and they win a world championship, and you're like, wow, like that was cool. Like we were stressing out, we were in the trenches. It's you and me, all right. I'm the coach. I'm trying to do the rehab with you. We're going to be here every day. Let's get really comfortable with each other. We're going to be spending a lot of time together. We're going to be doing some shitty stuff. Frustration is going to be through the roof. You're going to feel like you need to quit your career. But we're working to this North Pole of World Championships, and certainly when I was with Great Britain Taekwondo, I had one athlete where we rehabbed her in 6 months from her second ACL injury, and she won the World Championships, and it was just like amazing. Um, Here in the UFC, I mean, being around the Conor McGregor Floyd Mayweather fight, and Conor doing all of his preparation with us at the Performance Institute, and just the circus that brought, and then
What's he like
the
behind the
whole
scenes in terms of that? Because obviously we see the movie version of Connor, right? We see it, and
yes,
he's a showman quite clearly.
yeah.
But what is he like behind the scenes?
I mean, I think he is what you see, and I think Connor, when it's one to one, like you and I talking, Connor's like very personable, great guy, witty, sharp, very quick, but really interested in you and what you're doing and where things are at, and just a dude that wants to shoot the breeze, and But Connor's also a great showman, and he wants to demonstrate to the world that he is alpha male, right? So when the audience grows, Connor the fighter, Connor the promoter comes out, and he's the best to ever do it. Like outside of Ali, I honestly think Conor McGregor is what the best showman in
That's
combat sport
incredible.
ever, right? And so
I
you
mean,
see
you think
two sides to
it's fair
Conor.
to say he's potentially played a big role in the growth of the sport, actually,
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
absolutely. The sport wouldn't be what it is today without Conor McGregor and others,
Yeah, of
like
course.
Ronda Rousey,
Yeah.
John Jones, Conor McGregor, and then some of the new, the new school, Israel Adesanya, Francis Ngannou as he was, and then there's some there's something to be said for his promotional side versus just Conor the dude.
Hmm. Did you think there was any chance he could have he could have done? I was trying to think of a better adjective than that, but yeah, had a proper go on Mayweather. I mean, it was obviously a good scrap, but
Yeah, I mean, I think
so hard, isn't it? Because you just know if Mayweather's coming into his world, we just know what's happening in 30 seconds.
yeah,
But
it's like the whole chat of Tyson Fury and John Jones right now,
oh
right?
wow, yeah, that'd be incredible, wouldn't it?
No one knows what's going to happen. I'm not the expert, right? But because I'm not a boxing coach, but MMA and boxing are very different. Like if I'm a boxer, even where I'm looking, where I'm putting my eyes and looking at your offense and where my defense needs to be, I'm kind of looking at your kind of shoulder area and your head, right? Because this is
Yeah,
where you're holding your guard. In MMA, you're more looking, you've got knees and kicks and feet as well as elbows and fists that are coming at you. So you kind of lower your vision to more of the chest area. Which again, now you're talking about a different perception on offense and defense, and where your trends are and your tells, like it just different sports. So Connor did a great job, but I also
he is,
think
yeah.
that Floyd Mayweather was just waiting for
He's
him to burn
incredible,
out
isn't
a
he?
little bit, and
Yeah,
then he started stepping up.
yeah. Oh, be great to see if the Fury Jones comes off.
We shall see, but I'll tell you that
Do you have any
probably won't
inside
happen in Octagon.
information on
That's
that
not
one?
going to happen in Octagon with
Oh, of
MMA
course
rules.
it's
So,
not. No,
no
no, no.
chance.
I don't
No
think any
chance.
boxer would ever do that.
I mean, I would send one of our 135-pound guys in against Tyson Fury, and they would win because they would find a way to
Well, there you
submit
go.
again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Um, and then, can you talk us through again in the context of your career? What's been a moment you've had a challenge? You're like, oh fuck, how are we going to get through this one? There must have been a couple of those.
Yeah, I mean, well, the one thing which really sticks with me every single day, is when I actually went to start my PhD. So I did my PhD in America from 2000 2004. So I kind of up sticks and flown 5,000 miles from the UK to what was then central Indiana. And on day one, I'm just meeting, the guy that's going to be my professor, Kramer, that I spoke to about previously, and all my other kind of lab mates. There was 7 of us in a room around a conferencing table, and he went through every single one of these students that had been there previously, because I'm the new guy, telling them what the projects were that they're going to work on at that moment in time for this semester. And I'm sat on the end of the line, and he goes all the way along the line, telling everybody what they're going to do, and he gets to me and he goes, "Duncan, I don't even know why you're here. I must have had a moment of weakness." And I'll never forget those words. And I was like, "Holy fuck. This like that's a great equalizer. I've just up sticks and I've come to the US, and I don't even like, this guy doesn't even know what he's going to do with me or why he invited me." So it was kind of a great equalizer, and it kind of it resonates with me, because you got to prove things all the time. Like, you have to prove your worth and your value. So just because someone gave me a full ride scholarship to the US, and I'm like, yeah, I've left the UK, I'm now living my dream, I'm doing I'm living in America. This guy kind of was a great equalizer and put me back on the bottom rung from day one. It's like, okay, well, now I need to kind of prove myself, and I've got to go after it and do the work. So that really resonates with me. And when I did my oral defense 4.5 years later, it showed all my data on my slides. And then the last slide was, "Thank you." And it had the quote, "I must have had a moment of weakness. I don't even know why you're here." And it was like kind of a bit of a middle finger, like, yeah, I made it.
Yeah.
So that really sticks with me. And that's kind of a mantra that I follow.
No, I love that. And in terms of, I guess, a topical issue again at the moment is the concept of burnout, and you've touched about it in terms of the top athletes, is that almost that ability to switch on, perform, but then you got to switch off and recover quick, because if you don't recover quick, you're not going to benefit from the catalyst you've just sort of imposed on your brain and body. And then you do that for too long, you end up burnt out. I mean, what are the strategies that people listening to this that perhaps aren't getting in an octagon, but that are A-type, motivated people who are putting shifts in their relative crafts, whether that's in finance, the military, academia? What would you say as
all of it?
Yeah, we're all help.
Yeah, man. I mean, listen, I mean, we could have a how-long discussion on this, right? Because this is a challenge in the world and environment that we live in today. Especially when you're working in a sport where the perception of the desire to succeed is massive, the pressures to succeed are often massive. There's 1,000 other people that would take my role and sit in this seat, so the competition is huge. How do you and then the information, right? Like, the overwhelming amount of information that we have in today's world is just massive. Like, that then drives an emotional interaction that, like, am I good enough, am I worthy? Social media, like, is the worst thing for this. Like, we all look on social media, we see everyone in fucking Bora Bora, do you know what I mean? I'm like, well, I'm not in Bora Bora, and I'm sitting here in this office doing all this hard work. So, like, you're always comparing and contrasting with the Joneses. Yeah, right. So I mean, you have to purposefully consider it. And I've been, hands up, I've been in the hole historically, and I made bad mistakes of overworking, of giving all my worth to others in a service industry as a coach, like I'm serving others. So you've got to look at mechanisms and systems that can help you. I think I personally think a very strong morning routine is critical to reset. Taking your time away from what the rat race is, whatever your rat race may be. If you're a banker, if you're a cage fighter, if you're, whatever, a coach, like, you need to pull yourself away from that. You've got to allow kind of the down state to happen.
And what sort of
so
things?
morning routine for me is a big one.
Yeah, what sort of things would you include in that morning routine that might help regulate some of the stress hormones that are produced in the sort of scenarios we described?
Yeah, for me, wherever I can, my morning routine includes, waking up, no phone for at least 30 minutes, no social media for at least 30 minutes after waking. I try to get straight into a cold bath. You get that dopamine hit, 250% of basal dopamine levels. All right, so you kind of resetting the brain with natural endorphins, natural dopamine, not the endorphins from quick clicks and likes.
And
So
in lay terms, what's the benefit that people will feel from that?
I mean, again, you're basically hacking your brain, right? Because if you look at things like social media, and that's driving a dopamine response. You're looking for a validation, an affirmation from someone saying, "I like this." All right. There's been research done that shows when you look at overcoming challenges and more hardship and during hardship, that the dopamine response is more resilient and more impactful over time. So using things like cold stressors or heat stressors, whatever may be in a sauna, you get much more of a natural endorphin and
And that's more
dopamine.
sustainable.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, brilliant.
So I use cold plunge, which they're kind of vogue and fashionable at the minute. But again, I've used them because psychologically I feel better throughout the day. I don't get as many dips in my energy levels. I feel clearer. I'm not a coffee drinker, so I use that for kind of arousal and waking me up. And I also massively use it for breathing. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about managing the stress response, right? So if you do that first thing in the day, you've got to manage your parasympathetic nervous system and activate your parasympathetic breathing systems to relax in the cold bath. Now that is now setting me up for the rest of the day. I've already turned on the parasympathetic activation, which as I then come into work and I get around the chaos of fighting and combat and workload and emails and all this other stuff, all right, I've sequentially reduced the stress levels. Cortisol levels are highest in the morning. I can reduce those with that input of the cold bath. And now I can start, elevating the arousal over time before I go back to bed. So cold bath, I do a honey, lemon, and hot and warm water drink, essentially flush the system. And then I do like a 5 minute, 5 to 10 minute stretch kind of yoga. I do more of a meditation, yoga, mobility routine, get the body moving, and then I'm kind of set up for the day. So again, it's not the whole answer. I'm just kind of giving you an example of what
No,
I
it's
try to do
brilliant.
first thing.
It's really useful.
But it's again, you're trying to hack your physiology, so that you don't wake up and you're just like, oh shit, it's go time. I'm charged and redlining from the get go. And we need to allow the physiology, the ebbs and flows of sympathetic and parasympathetic ups and downs.
And would you say it's fair to say the act of engaging in whether it's cold, heat, or even a breathing exercise acts as almost a constraint that activates or potentiates that parasympathetic nervous system to kick in, a bit like stretching before going for a run?
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. Using it's a tool, right? It's a tool like using a massage, like a vibrating massage gun to remove tone in my muscle. You're just using cold water as a tool. That's not the answer. It's not to necessarily flush the lymph system or whatever. No, I'm using it as a tool to make my brain think, holy shit, this is cold. This is hard. I don't want to be here. And now I have to manage my cognition to actually move my brain and my mind and the downstream regulation of my physiology into a different space. So it's just a tool, it's a mechanism. Now
Another
it's
act of
better to,
ownership again, right? As well.
there's some great research around the hardship and the challenge that you have to go through, and the bigger the challenge, the greater the physiological reward from an endocrine response.
And that is almost a nice segue into the physical aspect, because again, for people listening who I imagine 80% of the people listening will probably in terms of their training protocols be looking to build a bit of muscle, cut body fat, be healthy. In terms of that intensity, how important is intensity in terms of stimulating the neuroendocrine response to generate that? I mean, I know you are a wizard in I guess the neuroendocrine system and testosterone specifically. I know the research you've published is mountain high.
Yeah. Well, I think what I would say is intensity is more I mean, yes, it does address kind of endocrine responses, downstream stress responses related to an intensity or a volume exposure. But intensity as a paradigm actually probably taps in more to the neural system. All right. And I think there's a lot of good research out there now around things like microdosing training, like microdosing strength exposure, and what you can do to, it's just, I want to suggest living in the microdosing of training is the best training paradigm. All right, you need to do a body of work, but in certain scenarios, particularly with athletes, if they're in a condensed season, a phase of the season, or they're in a competition phase, like our guys when they go into fight camp, like where everything ramps up, wherever you can get most ROI on your training investment and make it efficient, that's probably a good strategy to adopt for a period of time. Now, they are all intensity related. So there's a ton of research where you can pull up to 60% of volume and frequency out of a training week. But if you maintain the intensity, you can actually maintain and in some cases improve performance across time. So it's one of those ones where intensity is really driving the neural system if you're looking at performance maintenance. Now, when you look at endocrine responses, they are usually downstream of a stress insult. So again, I talk about dopamine with cold exposure, same thing to physical exertion and exercise. You're essentially stressing the system, and consequent to that stress, there is a host of different regulatory characteristics that happen in whether that be testosterone or cortisol or aldosterone or whatever it may be throughout the body. Things are upregulating. Glucose is obviously and insulin. Insulin is kind of the most tightly regulated hormone in our body. All of these things at any moment in time are changing across time. So I guess the synopsis of all of that is exercise is a stress, and we can also use other stresses, cold, heat, whatever it may be. Lack of energy, like feeding, so looking at fasting strategies, like that's a stressor, right? Your body's going to respond in a particular way. We can use all of these tools effectively to create a physiological adaptation and response that can have beneficial help to our body or our approach to optimization.
Brilliant. And then removing some of the junk in terms of the phone ban or the social media ban that gives you a quick short.
And I think that's the world we live in now, and there's going to be a ton of research on that in the next 5 to 10 years. You watch of the potential negative consequences of social media, and sadly, and again, I hate to be the doom and gloom guy, but sadly, people take their lives based on a negative remark or a lack of likes on social media. Now, like, how have we ended up there? Like that to me is shocking. So I mean, now listen, I use social media. I get pissed off with social media. Some social media is hugely educational, can be a great resource because it's at the click of a button and it's at your hands. But the management of this, I think we've all got a personal responsibility to figure out what's my threshold. Like, what's my threshold of engagement, and what are the consequent triggers that going above that threshold imparts on me, and that might take some time to figure out, but it's an important thing, I think, in your day-to-day optimization conversation.
And is there anything you do in terms of an evening routine? Because obviously sleep, I know sleep's something that's.
So it's interesting because I'm probably worst on an evening, because again, everyone has a circadian rhythm to their efficiency, right? So I'm not like an early riser. I'll wake up about 6:30, something like that. That's my normal body clock. But I tend to be able to work later in the day, like late at nighttime, my work productivity actually is more efficient, or I found it that way. Um, the problem is that all the physiological information, the research shows that whether it's blue light or whether it's putting stress at the end of the day, or whether it's kind of long sitting and or work hours, that's actually counterproductive, right? So I have to consciously manage the switch off of my day, because I would just sit there all evening working and get things done. So my morning routine is more not necessarily a routine, but it's like you got to stop, because I get in my flow later in the day, which is interesting. Everyone's different. My wife gets up at 5 a.m. and she's like sharp as a button at 5 a.m. and she's on it. So everyone's different. It's trying to figure out what your rhythm looks like, and then just being aware of what's going to promote good behavior and good practice and what's compromising your personal health, well-being, and performance.
Have you got any thoughts on sort of supplements? Good, bad?
I'm not a supplement expert, I will say, but I'm around, guys that are here. I think a lot of the supplement we do is with the fighters is around the brain health piece, and looking at minimizing the effects of brain injury. So it's quite nuanced, but we've got some really good paradigms in there. Looking at beta alanine and things for intermittent exercise as a really good conduit to performance optimization, alongside creatine and things like that. But we look at beta alanine for the management of the metabolic environment. But just on a day-to-day basis, whether it's magnesium or theanine and some of these things going to sleep, melatonin, whatever it may be. I think you've just got to figure out what works for you. But that's again a whole other minefield that I'm not the expert in. So
I'm going to ask you another question in this area, because I know you have done so much research on testosterone, but what are your thoughts on TRT? Again, it's getting more and more airtime, especially in the UK. You see, are there any sort of, I know obviously you being in the States, it's a lot more sort of used there. What are your thoughts as someone who's studied this hormone? And
yeah, listen, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone who's a professional athlete.
of course.
And right, from the anti-doping perspective, I think what I would say is that, again, it's kind of topical to what we're talking about, right? And Dan Gardner is a great resource on this one. He's got some really good stuff around TRT, in as much as there's a pyramid of things that you need to go to, right? So you don't immediately go to TRT. You got to evaluate, are you sleeping well, right? Is your sleep habits in a good spot, that you are optimizing the physiological responses that happen during sleep? Okay, if your sleep's on point, what's your diet like? Are you using certain food groups that promote testosterone release? Are you exercising regularly, a la my kind of research? Are you promoting the stimulus of testosterone or anabolism in your body? And then you get to, okay, well, if I've ticked all of these boxes, now I can start to look at the value of supplementation, or in the case of pharmaceutical TRT, as kind of the last thing. Like, I think you have to go through the process. Now, people are always going to, abuse a mindset, like, and they're going to say, well, what's Duncan French now? And they're going to go straight to, TRT, right? That's a personal choice. And I think, some of the strategies and the companies that are doing that are very well regulated, and some of them are not. Okay. And you got to be cognizant of who you're working with. But we know more about the dosing strategies for those types of things. We know more about the downstream negative effects of those things, as well as the positive effects. And I think some of these companies are regulating that, which is a great job, rather than me just being in a minefield on my own and trying to figure it out. Like, people can help me with the dosing strategies, which is critical in the process of TRT. But I think, again, for me, I want to go through, with anyone that I'm advising, I want to go through that process of saying, well, do you have suppressed circadian rhythms? Are your sleep patterns bad? How's your libido? Do you have a good libido or a poor libido? What's the consequences of your work day and your stress levels? How are you? How many times a week are you exercising? All these other things that can help promote testosterone and anabolic environments in your body for growth and longevity. Before I would go to say, all right, well, we need to start thinking about supplementation strategies with TRT.
It's a really useful model to use. And in terms of your career now, Duncan, what's most important to you in your role now?
Yeah, man, that's just wow. Deep-seated values question. Like, look at that one. I mean, listen, I still have the ambition to pursue success. I want to be around success, and that for me is in an athletic environment. I want to win. I want to be around winners. I want to look at how we continue pushing the envelope and doing things differently and better. And that's kind of my extrinsic validation, is like, oh yeah, you're around successful athletes, people that are winning fights or winning championships or whatever it may be. Like that's my extrinsic drive. And that goes back to kind of your very first question, right? Like, why did I get into this thing? Intrinsically, I think what I want is, hopefully I'm recognized as someone that's helping just move the field forwards. I think the field of strength and conditioning is very dogmatic. I think it's very set. When I look at other industries like architecture or design or technology, these industries seem to move faster. They don't get stuck in one process. Now I feel like I'm having the same conversations now that was 10 years ago. I'm like, why are we just stuck in this same conversation? We know it. There's research, there's information. Let's just believe it and let's move on. Let's go to another domain. So my personal values are, about kind of being a contributor. I want to be seen as someone that's, number one, approachable. That's someone that you can approach in the industry and that will, won't stand on airs and graces. I think I'm a pretty honest, straight up guy. Do you know what I mean? But also hopefully someone that people feel like I help them in their careers and their processes, and I continue to do that and support other people, navigate the industry.
And what are you most excited about in terms of the UFC over the next few years?
Well, I mean, listen, we're opening up more facilities, more centers, and that's always exciting. And I mean, like, we opened up the facility in Shanghai, China in 2019, and talk about like just cultural enlightenment, like how different it is over there. Now we're going to Mexico City in October, and again, same thing, just building new facilities, putting in new systems, recruiting new staff, a new team. That's fun to me. Like, I like building things. I like creating systems and building operations that are perceived as working very well and might be a benchmark or a standard that aspire to. That's a driver for me. Like, the UFC Performance Institute didn't exist, and I was employee number one, given the blank piece of paper, and they said, all right, you go and build this thing, and it seems to be going pretty well, touch wood. Okay. So I get off on that. That's what excites me. But doing that in a different territory, a different marketplace, whether it's in the Middle East or in Australia or in Europe or Brazil or wherever it may be, that's always
plans for
exciting.
London soon or UK?
not anytime soon. I can't tell you about London. So
that's sad to hear.
Yeah.
I wanted to get your advice. Like, you're someone who in the performance space, reputation precedes yourself. And I really want you to answer this question for people that are listening now, who are perhaps not performing at the level they'd like to perform, and that deep down they know they're capable of, but they're perhaps struggling to just get that ball rolling. What's your advice to someone who's dedicated pretty much a life to the performance space? What would your advice be to that person?
Yeah, I mean, it's the 1% every day. You just got to try and be 1% better every day. Keep moving forwards. And with that mentality comes the behavioral patterns and the behavioral changes. And it's like an investment, right? It's like investment banking. you're going to put in £1 or $1, and in a year's time, that's going to be $10. Then that $10 will become $100,000. Like, it's just exponentially grows. But the challenge is always the first step, right? You don't look at climbing Everest and say, well, I want to go from here to there. Like, that's no mountaineer does that. All right. It's one step at a time. And it sounds very cliche, but even with athletes that are seasoned professionals, we've got to get 1% better every day. Like, we just got to try and be better. We've got to be a better version of ourselves. You've also got to embrace the fact that you can't be naive. Like, the world doesn't offer you anything. It doesn't owe you anything. Same thing when I went and the guy said, why are you even here? I don't know why you're here. Right. Like, so, it's about educating yourself. You have to be somewhat informed. So if you're overweight, or if you're deconditioned and not working out, or if you had a bad diet, like, no one's gonna give it to you. You need to at least get some awareness of the process. And that's where you move from being a victim, like, oh well, the world is against me. You can't sit in a victim mentality. You have to work in a growth mindset mentality. And 1% is still growth, right? So for me, it's about when you're struggling, when you're in a hole, when you're burnt out, when you're stressed out, you think you're in the wrong job, you're not paid enough, people don't like you, whatever it may be. You got to find those 1%. You got to find those things that will say, actually, today I'm going to get better at this. I'm going to learn this. I'm going to just Google, all right, how do I remove body fat? And I might read one paragraph. That's 1% better, right? So that's the mentality that I try to adopt. I think, by being 1% better, you also understand when you're worse or when you're in a bad place, right? So if I educate myself more, when I start to slide or when I start to go downhill, I'm actually more informed to recognize that that's happening, or to recognize that actually I've got to stop that. I've got to reverse that process. So it always comes back to, for me, to this 1% mentality.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. I want to sort of finish off the conversation with a few more sort of more quick fire questions.
Yeah.
And I want to start with, well, number one, greatest team of all time.
Holy shit. Greatest team of all time. I mean, it's got to be the do you mean for winning, or for just like, these are quick fire questions here? I'm a scientist trying to answer. So the greatest team of all time, the New Zealand All Blacks.
Okay.
Right? Because the mystique that goes with that organization, unbelievable. Greatest team of all time, the Chicago Bulls that won all those titles. Right. So if you're looking at success, but for me, the greatest team of all time is the All Blacks, just because you hear the word the All Blacks and you're like, oh, I know what that means.
There's something special with that word, isn't it?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't put it on like the 1947, Newcastle United team. No, it's like the All Blacks for me is the best team.
Do you know what I heard about the All Blacks? It was really interesting, actually, was that when they looked to reset way back when, before they became the absolute giants in world rugby, the haka used to be some sort of silly little dance that they didn't even pay much attention to. And as part of this reset and going back to first principles of what makes us unique, they sort of uncovered and unearthed this iconic sport, the haka. I mean, it's an iconic moment in elite sport, full stop, isn't it? Almost recognized by anyone around the world. There's nothing else like it.
No, I've been when I was with the Great Britain basketball team. It wasn't rugby, but the basketball team, we played New Zealand. They did the haka on the court. We were lined up and we're watching the New Zealanders do the haka. I mean, it gets you, right. It's brilliant. Else. Yeah.
Greatest leader of all time.
Oh my God. That's tough. Tough question. Greatest leader of all time. Have you seen the Winston Churchill film?
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's interesting, right? I don't know if he's the greatest leader, but I'm just like going through my mind. Like, when he was a bit of a bit crazy, right?
Yeah.
And then found out a way to make it work for him. There's wartime leaders, there's sports leaders. The one person that I'm not big on celebrity. I don't really get bothered by celebrity that much. But I did some work at Manchester United, and when Alex Ferguson walked in, there was an aura about this guy
I can
that
imagine.
was unlike anyone else I've been around.
Yeah.
It was very bizarre. I've never felt that before.
Yeah. Okay, then, and then greatest athlete of all time.
Um, so many, right? So many. I mean, it's what you define great by. Uh,
Who jumps to mind?
well, I mean, you go through the regulars of Muhammad Ali, Michael Jordan, Jonah Lomu, you
Yeah.
know, like you start thinking about who was just like changed the game, like who changed the game, the needle, and yeah, I mean, I think Jordan changed the game. I think Muhammad Ali probably changed the game. Um, yeah, well, Steve Redgrave.
Oh wow. Yeah. Yeah. Incredible.
There's a guy I spent a lot of time with, Steve, and he's a great individual to talk to. But the feat that he did of 5 Olympic gold medals has never been repeated, right? So
Yeah, it's incredible.
over 5 different Olympic games, like that's freaking resilience and
Something else,
fortitude,
eh?
like unreal.
And the challenges along the way as well. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll spin it back to some just quick personal stuff. Favorite movie?
Gladiator.
Brilliant shout. Favorite series?
Not really big TV. Homeland.
Ah, nice. Book?
I mean, we would say legacy, right? Based on
Right.
what we're
Yeah,
talking
yeah, yeah.
about, but, closely followed up by the Gold Mine Effect.
Okay. Yeah, great book. Quote?
Quote. Um,
Is there a quote saying man can
You can't be disappointed by the results of the work that you didn't put in.
Oh, I love that one. Beautiful. Last question. If there was one message you could drill into society at the moment, what would that be?
Love each other.
Beautiful. Duncan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this conversation. I think people are going to get so much value out of this.
No worries. Appreciate it. Thanks, buddy. It was fun.
Speak soon. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us today. I love this topic of human performance and excellence, and I've been engaged in it neurotically for the last 20 years. It's a sincere privilege to have the opportunity to share my knowledge, network, and learnings with you. Now, go and put the principles to work. Make sure you let us know what resonates. Reach out with questions, blind spots. We've got you covered. Remember, excellence is just a series of days repeated over and over again. Now go and win your day. In 2021, I published my first book, Accelerating Excellence. If you're finding the conversations and information on this podcast useful, you might want a physical reference point and to gain even deeper awareness of the concepts discussed. The book's actually more of an operation manual containing more detail with a step-by-step guide on how to implement all this stuff so you can get maximum benefit, which was one of my main motivations in writing it. Yes, I want the podcast and the book to be inspiring and entertaining, but it was non-negotiable for me to make sure that the listener or reader is provided with a structure and direction in terms of actually putting this stuff to work. The book's called Accelerating Excellence. It's a #1 international bestseller. And if you're moving from more than just interest towards implementation, I think you'll really enjoy it. Like everything I do, the book is evidence-based, but practice-led, drawing on my experience working with some of the world's most elite, exclusive, high-performing teams and individuals. It's filled with highly actionable strategies you can apply today to become better tomorrow. If this sounds like something from you, see the link in description where you can download 6 chapters of the book for free in either audio or digital format. It's also available to purchase on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and at your local bookstore. I hope you enjoy. By now, we all know the importance of a winning mindset. We're bombarded with elite performers telling us that mindset's what separates the best from the rest. That if we want to be successful, we need to be more confident, resilient, and motivated. And of course, when panic strikes, we need to calm down, relax, or chill out. Great, we get it. But the question is how? We're given this guidance with almost zero practical advice in terms of how to achieve it. Where can we actually go to develop that world-class mindset? What's the back squat for resilience, the bench press for confidence, and the bicep curl for positive thinking? Well, that's why I created the Mindset app. Through the app, you'll gain access to the psychological skills training used by world champion athletes, special forces operators, and some of the world's most successful traders and investors. The reality is these guys pay me a fortune to help them get this right. But the thing is, these skills are equally, if not more important, for the aspiring athlete, executive, or operator. And that's exactly why I created this app. I want these tools and training available to anyone, anywhere, anytime. Mindset is a skill, and like any skill, it can be developed with the right strategy and effort. The tools and techniques are designed in a way that will literally rewire your brain, like learning to ride a bike or drive a car. All the techniques are designed with creating a high-performing, self-regulating you 2.0. Every strategy in the Mindset app is backed by empirical research. There's 10-minute emotional control training exercises that have been shown to increase your ability to overcome detrimental decision-making biases by up to 80%. In another study, just 3 weeks of executing visualization training led to 34% improvements in performance. Another research group found 50% greater improvements in the rate of learning. And just a few weeks of performing visualization led to 22% reductions in anxiety and 21% increases in confidence. These numbers are phenomenal, and I've never met an elite performer in any domain that can afford to be missing out on this type of edge. What I love most is that we've structured everything so that you don't need to carve out an extra hour in your day to get this done. Small bite-sized chunks of 5 to 10 minutes are all it takes. In fact, I'd only encourage you to use the tool on your commute, in the sauna, at the end of your working day, or bolt it onto the end of your gym session. Any dead time you have can now immediately be transformed to deliver you extreme performance gains. My goal is to remove every possible obstacle to your development. And with that in mind, the basic package is completely free. Visit the link in description and sign up for our pre-launch free emotional control, visualization, and performance routine programs. I really hope you enjoy.